sort of book in quotes. This is a graphic novel by the name of Blankets. It is sort of out of season. This is actually a book that's set heavily in the cold, frigid state of Wisconsin. And this book is actually a few years old, quite some years old now. I believe this came out in 2003, 2004 ish. But I was introduced to it when I was mobile. I found it, sitting on, as one of their sort of displays they had there, and and I saw it, and the cover just sort of drew me in. And it's this very quiet. You can see it's like beat up. By the way, this is going to be audio and video podcast. So for you audio listeners, I'm sorry you have to see me sort of describe what's going on here. But the cover is this very quiet, very pensive, very romantic, cover to it, where it's like kind of like very dark, has two, a guy and a girl kind of, holding each other, and it's just very blank and simple. What we'll see is, and I'll get into this later, is why I find this book to be so sort of special, and why I sort of fell in love with it. So before we go any further, just remember this is from a Green Team production from our Discord. You can find us on the Legendarium on Reddit and Discord, and all the links and everything will be below, so you can find the main podcast from Red Team and Blue Team, and find our sort of spin-off Green Team podcast. So to get started, we are looking at Blankets by Craig Thompson. If this isn't his first book, this is going to be one of his one that sort of puts him on the map. This was a pretty big, important book for him, and it's pretty thick. This book is, for in the way of graphic novels go, this is pretty large. This is some 500 and some pages. But what makes this book stand out so much is the fact that it's written and drawn by him all together. He does both. He does both. He writes it and he illustrates it. And the book itself is metaphorical in a sense that the artwork sort of plays into how the narrative is going. So there's plenty of instances where the author will be describing something, and it'll be sort of a metaphoric imagery of what's going on. There's a scene where when he's a little kid. Oh, and then, by the way, this is a autobiographical story, so it is about basically his life growing up. So there's a moment here in the book where basically he and his little brother are basically misbehaving, and you can see here that his father is one of those pretty strict, by the book parents, no nonsense, and he grabs his younger brother. Craig is writing as himself, basically. This is his autobiography. So his little brother Phil is sort of the one that gets kind of tormented, and you can see that the artwork here just looks. It almost looks. It reminds me almost a bit of Tim Burton. Sort of, where the exaggerated faces and everything, and Abel's kind of sort of like lanky. But you can see some of the really creative artwork where so he takes Phil's brother away, puts him into the attic, and the bed which his father opens up for him to sleep in is drawn as like this monstrous creature with like teeth and snarling and everything. There's like demons and things in the attic, where his brother, he basically consigned his brother to sleep for the night. And what I really love about the book is the fact that it has these moments where uh, it played as like a very like there's one there's a scene where he's getting basically beat up in school, um, and that's played very straight. This bullies with bad mullets beating him up. But then there's other more fantastical moments where the narrative sort of plays into how, like the artwork sort of plays into how the narrative and what's being described basically, which I really found to be very captivating. Um, and there's a whole bunch of things like, and the point of the book itself is him growing up in basically with his brother and his parents, and his parents are very religious, and I think this is all sort of what factors into why I sort of resonate with this book so well. Because I grew up not religious at all. I grew up very my father was more into like space and science and everything. So I didn't really have a background in religion, and I never really went to church. None of us did. We didn't really go to church. We didn't really go to any church functions. We weren't Bible readers by any stretch of the imagination. Um, so uh, it always was sort of like a closed door for me. So I always found it kind of fascinating how people could get so wrapped up into religion and how that basically played into their daily life. And how it affected the choices they made. So this book was sort of hot on the heels of that. And also when I found this book, I was fresh out of high school. I didn't know really what I wanted to do with my life. I really connected with the character of Craig because it sort of takes you from when he was a kid, when he was a little kid, to as when he got older, how he and his brother bonded, but had like these really nasty fights with each other. Like from the beginning of it, you're not gonna believe that these two guys are actually friends because they grew up spending a ton of time together. It's shown here a bunch where Craig and Phil would like be drawing together. They would create these like imagine they'd be playing in the woods in their backyard together, um, and they'd be watching TV with their parents. You can see here, and for you audio listeners, the book is all black and white, and it's done in such a creative way. Like there's like what I'm showing here on screen is basically um, uh, the character Craig. He's probably around like maybe 7 or 8 years old, and he's having these sort of fantasies of getting away from this boring life he lives in Wisconsin and with his family. So he's like he's like drawing himself in like a getaway car, um, uh, escaping. And then on the next page, it basically shows that he can't escape his real life, and his little cartoon car, basically falls apart. And then you see in the next panel, he's surrounded by a whole bunch of like demon-like characters, but they're probably all like his teachers and parents and people around him in his town. So the book is filled with stuff like this, which I really, again, really, it really just captivates the imagination. And I know there's not a ton of comic book, and I don't want to call this a comic book because it's really not. This book is more earns the title graphic novel through and through. Um, I think that, but for you guys who aren't into comics or don't really take graphic novels seriously, I would highly recommend giving this a chance. 'Cause this book is it goes into the characterization and plot of how he becomes who he is, basically, and all of like the trials and things that he has to go through in trying to become like a better person, basically. And later on, so he's basically struggling also with his religion, and how he deals with it because religion was basically forced upon him. And again, I'm not making any accusations or claims or anything, but I feel like religion is often forced upon many people. Um, but I do feel like no, and it does help many people. But from his point of view, religion was something that was sort of just always there for him, and it was not necessarily something he actively sought out, but it was just something that he was kind of pushed to, and it shows that in the fact that um, he goes to church camp basically every summer with his brother, and it shows in the book that they basically have sort of like a dull time just learning about Bible lessons and everything. Um, and but one year he goes when he's much older now. He's in his probably like he's in his teens now, and he goes to church camp and he meets a group of kids, three or four kids, one of them being a girl, this girl named Raina, and they sort of kind of hit it off, and they become really close in that summer they have together, and from there the relationship kind of forms. You can see here that this is him going into church camp. He has like long hair, and at the time, this also takes place. I want to say this takes place in the mid '80s. He has like long hair, and there's like people making fun of him for looking like a girl. And in the book, Craig doesn't get. He's very quiet. He's a very quiet, reserved kid. What is the? It's gonna bother me now. The Briggs, what is it? The Briggs Meyer scale of personality, where he definitely would be an introvert. You can see here he's basically wandering around church camp, kind of looking sort of bored. He has his skiing stuff, and there's like the popular kids babbling about whatever, and he sees this group of sort of not punks, but they're definitely not on the cool side of it, the popular side of things. One guy's wearing like a leather jacket with a mohawk. Um, Definitely the weed smoking type, which they do get into later. But he also meets the girl Raina here on the last panel, and then they sort of hit it off, and from there the relationship kind of builds, um, and and just to go back a bit, so the book also cuts back and forth between now, like where he's more of like a teenager, to where he was when he's a kid, with his brother, and you can see here that uh, he's having sort of like a not a flashback, but sort of like a recollection of when he was a kid, when he was with his younger brother, and they were really hot, and when they were growing up together. Their family relationship is very interesting because you see it from the point of view of obviously Phil, I'm sorry, from Craig, but you see his brother too, and how his brother reacts to it, but they don't really go into later on in the book they do. They sort of touch upon how his brother sort of turned out. But I just love the dynamic between them, the relationship between them, because they were both very close together, and you see here Craig is basically pranking his younger brother, and they're both like miserable. But Craig in the book here, he is not mean to Phil, but he sort of always gets him into either trouble, or he sort of talks down to him. And this comes into play later on when Craig has like this sort of guilty conscience weighing on him. And there's an event that happens later on with an older boy that involves Phil, Craig's brother, and that event sort of shapes how Craig turns out, and it's pretty devastating to see what sort of happened and what Craig allowed to happen. And Craig gets beat up himself in school, so he sort of takes that out on his younger brother. So whatever Craig goes through, he sort of tries to like mirror it to an extent on his younger brother, and that, again, that sort of comes back into play later on. And I love this scene. So this is probably one of my favorite scenes in the book. This is when he's still younger, but he again, they go to church camp every year. So this is when Craig is younger. He's wandering around alone at night in church camp. It's snowy, it's cold. He wanders into one of the cabins, and he's sort of walking around by himself, and and there's like this hum of the generator, and it's this very soothing, melodic, very quieting hum and sort of comforting. And in the panel here, he's sort of cradling his knees to his chest and letting the hum of the generator sort of envelop him and comfort him after he got beat up earlier in the day. Which again I love. When I was reading this, I never got like beat up in school or anything, but I was never a popular kid by any stretch. So so when I was reading this, even though I was a bit older at the time, stuff like this just really hit home with me. I was definitely a sucker for coming of age stories, and this one, especially the fact that it's sort of the fact that it's written in an autobiographical tone, and it actually has taken place to a lesser extent. So I will say I'm not sure how much of this book actually literally took place. I will give Craig Thompson the full benefit of saying that I'm sure most of this is as accurate as possible. There are some things in here that they go back to again when he's a kid, and some of the things that he's thinking is like, did you really think that when you're like 8, like having like these really metaphysical thoughts? So this like like how existential life is. So it could be a little exaggerated, but the core idea is definitely there, which I love. So again, there's a when he does meet this girl when he's older and he's back at church camp, he meets this girl Raina, and you can see them meet for the first time. They have this very cute moment where they both kind of like brush their hair out of their behind their ears, and the other two guys she's with. So there's 3 of them. There's Raina and these two other guys, and then Craig meets them and sort of joins up with them, and they go back to their cabin. Again, this church camp, they probably rent out cabins and everything. So they go back to their cabin, and they basically attempt to try to get smoke weed and get high. And they have this sort of run-in with some of the camp guards here, and they sort of bond over that. And it's just stuff like this where the book is very dark. I don't mean dark in the sense like it's evil and brooding, but it's dark in the sense that because it is black and white, it has such a cold, very lonely feel to it. Like here he is after they separated. He sort of basically ran away from them. Basically, he saw that they were getting high, and it wasn't for him because he's brought up in this religious family. So getting high definitely not something he took lightly to. And he's sort of sitting alone now as he's older, as opposed to before when he was a kid at church camp. He was sitting alone. But he's sitting alone again, this time older, thinking about this girl he just met. And there's this shot of the snow sort of falling around him with the church bell ringing. And because it's in black and white, it just has this tone to it. There's a very lonely feel to it, and everything's so cold and remote. And what's really cool is they do meet up again, and they have their sort of moments together where they're sort of now meeting up alone now, one-on-one, and just goofing off, kind of getting to know each other. And there's that very like high school, sort of very cute high school banter back and forth. And they spend quite a bit of time together. I'm sort of cycling through this, where she falls asleep. Basically, you can tell she's like worried about something in her own personal life. They sort of hide out underneath the arcades that are set up, and they have sort of had this this little sort of adventure together, avoiding some of the people there. But it's moments like this where she sort of falls asleep next to him underneath the like arcade machine basically, and it's just so quiet. Like it has them just kind of like brushing hands, and is a complete blank panel with just them sort of cradling each other, and all in black and white. And then, like I said, it goes then back to a flashback of Craig's earlier life with his kid brother. And how they would have some sort of, like they would basically challenge each other to walk on the ice fields together, because again they grew up in Wisconsin where it is I'm assuming they had probably like a big background, a big backyard rather of that got frozen over, and they'd play a game to see who can stand on this very thin sheet of ice the longest. Um, and it also goes into his school, his upbringing, into how he was kind of made fun of a lot in school. And his teachers were all obviously. I'm assuming he must have gone to. Well, no, he didn't go to a private school because it shows that it was like a public school, but it obviously had like a very religious amount of people that went to the school. So they were talking about how he envisions heaven, where he because he loves art obviously, and that comes up a lot in this book. He is always drawing as a kid, and the teacher asks him, "What would heaven look like to you?" And he basically says, "Oh, it would be where I can draw nonstop." It says, in fact, if I read for a second, it says, the teacher says, you can sing in heaven all day, but Craig looks down at his paper and says, "But I can't sing." And she says, "In heaven you'll have a beautiful voice, but I don't like to sing." He says, "Couldn't I praise God with drawings?" And she says, "No, I mean, come on, Craig. How can you praise God with drawings?" So he's always being looked down upon at his school, at even at home, where he doesn't really get encouraged to draw and to follow up on his drawings and do anything like that. They just see it as sort of more like hobbies. So later on, we move past. We're back to his later stages in life, where basically he leaves camp and he comes back home and he basically made sort of pen pals with Raina. So again, in the 80s, they don't have cell phones or internet, so they have to basically write to each other, which is he has like is a panel of him like running off with a letter that he got from her, a big goofy smile on his face. So he like draws them together, and he does a whole bunch of drawings basically with her, and he sends them to her, and they sort of go back and forth. And he's also very, another thing that sort of drew me in is where he gets sick very often, and he has like these hacking coughs, and you can tell he's not in like the. I mean, in real life, I'm assuming he's okay, but he doesn't. In the book, in the comic here, a graphic novel, he has sort of like this. Um, he gets sick very often, and you're not really sure what it is, but it's nothing like life threatening. But you can tell he doesn't have the best immune system. And then we find out later on where Raina is calling him from like a payphone, where basically we get a glimpse here that her own home life isn't really the best either, where her parents are going through a divorce, and she attempts to drive to him, I believe from Michigan to Wisconsin, and she doesn't make it, but she has again the imagery here is just gorgeous. Like it shows her at like a sort of like truck stop, where she tried to drive to get to him, but she couldn't make it. It was a snowstorm, and you can see like the such a cold, dismal look to it. Like there's like a shot of a street light from like the ground up, and you can see like the glow of the street lamp with the snow falling around it. Gorgeous. He sets the tone of his book so well, and it's not all like grim and dismal. There's a bunch of levity, and there's a bunch of imagery that are just very creative and very lighthearted. So they do end up meeting up. They both ask their parents, "Is it okay if they meet up together?" And their parents think that this is just like a very platonic friendship basically that was forged in church camp. So their parents are okay with it as long as they don't sleep together or anything crazy, sleep in the same room. So they meet up sort of halfway. You can see his father, and just the facial reactions, because there's like a shot of the father looking. in the rearview mirror as Craig's parents' car pulls up, and um, they both meet together, and they like this. They have this very. If I was a parent, I would be a little suspicious of this. They have like this long embrace where they're like hugging and like very very close, and the parents are looking this. They have like this quizzitive look on their face, like okay, and the parent, both sides of the parents meet, and they're both religious, so they feel like it's okay to allow them to have like to spend like a weekend together. Um, and the father is like Raina's father is they're going to spend the night at Raina's parents' place, and her father is like a barrel of laughs. He's like this big, jolly guy, very nice, but very stressed out. He's going through a divorce, which he doesn't agree with. He's also pretty religious, so he doesn't really agree with the whole concept of divorce. Um, and yeah, and we meet Raina's siblings who are adopted, who have some mental issues, um, and both very nice, but they both have something going on where um, they're not they're not exactly mentally capable of taking care of themselves. So that's why Rain is sort of always stressing out, with them because she has to sort of take care of them. They're not really able to do it themselves, which again comes into play later. Um, and yeah, so I'm not gonna go through the whole book. There's some 500 pages, but if you really enjoy the sort of coming of age story here, and how they both form this really tight bond with each other, and they both hang out. They spend like this weekend together, and they both hang out, get to know each other, and basically fall in love really, where they have this bond that's become so tight. They both like she sort of writes more and he draws. So they sort of collaborate together, and they have these very and the imagery. The book is he basically um, the book is called Blankets. So they have this sort of blanket that she makes for him, where it's sort of like this hodgepodge of materials, um, and he carries that through his life basically until later on, where you see he locks it away when they sort of split ways. But yeah, I really can't highly recommend this book enough. The just from the imagery of the panels, how it's written, how it's laid out. Really, I would say if you haven't picked it up yet, if you haven't even heard of it, check it out. It's from Craig Thompson. And like I said, I urge you guys, for you guys who don't normally go for graphic novels or comic books, I would really get out of the idea that this is a comic book. It is really not. I mean, this tells literally a person's life story in his formative years, and has pictures like this, where it's just this very expansive, very close romantic almost feeling to it. And on that note, this is actually the only graphic novel that actually has a album that goes with it. And I gotta say, guys, if you do get the book and you read this, I have yet to hear a musical album. And there's a full orchestrated album that goes along with this book. It's literally called Blankets, and it's from a band called Tracker. I'll put the link below. But they literally they wrote the album for this graphic novel here, and it fits beautifully. Maybe I'll play a section of it before the podcast, for the episode, because just to hear this, slow, methodic, echoing, you know, um, uh, track listing of the songs, it fits the mood of the book perfectly. So I really can't highly recommend doing both together. I would find if you wait to get a copy of the album. Unfortunately, I don't think they're even together anymore, the band. Um, but I would definitely see if you can get a copy of the album. if possible, and listen to it as you're reading through this, because it fits to a T. It fits, hand in hand, the mood that's being set up here. Um, and and here we also see we also get glimpses into Raina's childhood as well, where she's sort of sewing and making things, which again is the where the term the name of the book comes from, blankets, where she gives him this blanket and he basically keeps it. Um, and here you see they're parting, they both part ways, and the book, the ending of the book stuck with me so much. For I literally mean for days afterward, I was thinking about the ending of this book and how sort of impactful it was for me. Um, because because it definitely has a melancholy ending. It's not like a very happy sort of they all end up together. It's very pretty much, they split ways, and that's sort of it. But it's this tale of how he got from A to B. Um, and there's some great scenes of also where he draws. Uh, Obviously, he becomes an artist, and he paints something on her wall in her room, which is this tree. Trying to find a picture of it. He paints this tree for her, and it's so sort of sad at the end, because you see at the end they break up, and they basically don't really talk to each other anymore. You see the idea that she paints over the tree, in her room, where you see like it slowly being erased from her wall, and this relationship that they built, is sort of just wiped out. It's so good. Like I said, if you can find it, I would highly recommend it. It's a very sad but not, depressing book, but it's a book that I would say definitely sticks with you if you're definitely open for it. And just to read the back here from New York Times, it says, in telling a story which includes beautifully rendered memories of the small brutalities that parents inflict upon their children and siblings upon each other, Thompson describes the ecstasy and ache of exception with a lover, with God, and is unafraid to suggest the ways that obsession can consume itself and evaporate. And yeah, I can't really sum it up any better. Some of the things that he goes through in the book, like here, where he always he has this very constant battle with his parents and religion. Like, he tries to like do good by what they would want, but he doesn't. You can tell he doesn't really just religion to him is just something that was sort of introduced to him. It wasn't really sort of something that he, I guess, wanted to come to himself. But yeah, so guys, if you haven't checked it out yet, please do so. This is Blankets by Craig Thompson. Came out in 2004. There's actually a really nice hardcover edition. I have the floppy, the older first edition of the soft cover, but I definitely want to get the hardcover, because in fact the hardcover actually looks even darker. It has like a black border around it, and it looks even better. So I definitely want to get. I definitely need to upgrade sometime. But if you really haven't checked this out, I highly recommend it, guys. Read it in the winter. Read it when it's cold. it just fits the mood perfectly. Try to find the album too by Tracker. It is. I love the spine too of them just kind of holding each other. It's such a like. I'm not one for normally like teen romance or anything like that, but it's just such an innocent coming of age story where these two kids are so cute together. They have like this. They form this great bond, and it's just heartbreaking to see how it sort of dissolves. But yeah, so check it out, guys. This is Craig Thompson, Blankets. This book actually picked up quite a few awards. I want to say it got the Eisner Award, but I could be wrong on that. But it's 4 out of 5 on Goodreads, out of 5 on Books a Million, 93% score on Google. Yeah, I really would say, if you can get a copy, definitely read it. It's one of my favorites. They're also a go to for if I am recommending a book, a graphic novel that someone wants me to kind of get into the vibe and more serious graphic novels and not the regular comics. Always one that I pick. So that's it, guys. This is Steve, aka Horizon Brave from Green Team on Legendarium. Um, Join the podcast. This is a solo one for me today. We usually have our team discussions. We'll be doing more of those in the future. So if you can subscribe and if you think about joining us on Patreon, that would be great, guys. Thanks and take care.